Introducing myself, this is Bharadwaj, Director of Information Services. I play multiple roles in UC Irvine Health, run applications. I'm the CISO, and with changes happening there, kind of taking a bigger, broader role as well. I also spend quite some time supporting the industry. Spent quite some time with the executive committee of the Cybersecurity Council for Health and Human Services, as well as sit on the board for HIMSS, American Executives for Health Information Security. It's part of the CHIME, the trifecta of the CHIME. This was something that I normally am here early opening this event. Because this is something that I've done for 8 years. My apologies, I couldn't make it here. We got giant commission show up in our hospital yesterday, so all hell broke loose, as you know. I just stayed back for our first meeting this morning and then kind of came down here, and after I finish, I'll kind of dash back. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but I just want to get you guys up to speed on what we are looking at. Introducing our folks who drive from far, far away, and they flew from far, far away. Two non-SoCal people. You know, San Diego is still SoCal, but you're new to San Diego, right? So that's okay.
Relatively.
Relatively, all right. Okay. So it's interesting. We were talking to Kara from Sharp, rather, and Kara Marks from Sharp, and she actually told us that, you know, he should come down and spend some time to understand what's going on in the industry. I said, sure, I will. We'll put him on a panel and put him on the spot. And Bryan, thank you for making it out here. Really, folks who've done this before, who've been there, done that, kind of can talk to you about a lot of things. But today we're going to talk about data. And Bryan, you want to introduce yourself, and you want to go first, and you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go. Chris Convey. I'm the CISO at Sharp. Been with Sharp for almost a year and a half now. I was at a smaller company before that, Millennium Health, the toxicology lab. Was the CISO and then the CIO as well. And then I was at Kaiser before that. And then before that, it's even less interesting, so I won't go into it. But was at Kaiser leading HIPAA security program and compliance. But pretty much been in security and risk my whole career.
Right.
Hi, Bryan Kissinger. I've been at Banner about a little over a year and a half. I was also at Sharp, and prior to that, Kaiser Permanente, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Navy, things like that. And Chris and I go way back.
We
so
do.
That's why we know each other. So. We might finish each other's thoughts. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk about data. Let's talk about how we perceive data as an end to a means. Bryan, your thoughts on data, and then Chris.
Well, I think if you ask any modern company, they would tell you that data is the asset that they're selling. And I once heard Ken Chenault at American Express say, you know, they're not a financial services company, they're a data company. And I think a lot of organizations have adopted that philosophy. We in healthcare are catching up to that. We've always had a lot of data. It's very sensitive data, it's very important data. We have a fiduciary and moral responsibility to protect that data, and we're only now getting to the point where rather than just trying to protect it for our own self-preservation, we're starting to see the real value in data analytics, data management, information governance, and all of that. So for us, it's all about the data.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And building any risk management program, it really needs to be centered around the data. Oftentimes that's not the case. And I'll also add, when we talk about risk and information risk, within the health system as we build information security programs. It's not just data, it's also the concern about patient harm. So there's multiple aspects we have to deal with, but data is really at the center of it. And if it's not at the center of your information risk program, then you're not focusing on the right things potentially.
So 10 years ago, we did not have as many EMRs out there, and now we've got 98% penetration on the EMR side. And harvesting that data for identifying the right care plans or the right pathways for improved patient care and deliver better outcomes is something that all of us are wanting to do. Some call it population health, some call it ACO, some call it value-based care. There's a lot of, but all of that stems on the data that they have. Data around the claims, data around clinical outcomes, data around patients, or data on how they are actually performing within the organization against their KPIs or benchmarks. So I'm sure your organizations also are looking at doing that. How does that impact from a security perspective, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the catch-22 of healthcare information. You want more data to be able to do those types of things and analytics. But the more you share, the more you produce, the more data you get, the more risk there is, right? The more you interoperate with other health systems, we want to promote that, but then there's risk associated with it. So I think it's a careful balance. It's healthcare first, and then trying to reduce the risk of some sort of breach or unauthorized disclosure. So I think data is the future. It's the future of any company, and we have to live with that. And we have to think of the different ways of how to manage the risk associated with that.
Your thoughts, Bryan?
Yeah, I think that's right. And like many of our organizations, we're probably spending a lot of time trying to get more connected with the consumer. We have a big project at Banner called the Digital Front Door, and the tagline is call in, walk in, click in. And we're spending large amounts of money and efforts to really make healthcare a high-quality Amazon-type experience. That's what we say a lot. So whether that's I want to have everything within a mobile app, I want to have convenience of having Lyft pick me up and bring me to my appointment, to how do I get access in a ubiquitous way to all of the different systems that you have in the back office. And so it is a balancing act. I think the one thing that we're doing well is we've created a business architecture layer within that project in specific, and we are making sure that we're doing it in a safe way.
So he just touched upon a lot of things, and I just want to get the understanding. A business architecture layer, are you looking at building security as part of the architecture layer in order to make sure that the transaction that goes through that is secure, in a way, make sure that the recipient is not inordinately, going through loops to get the data, but bringing it in?
Yeah, we're trying to be really efficient. I heard someone else talk about contract management earlier today, and you'll be amazed when you start working with your innovation teams and these digital teams. Geez, it might surprise you. They don't like bureaucracy and having to do security risk reviews and things like that. So we've dedicated a team to this initiative, and all they do is help support that agile development environment and help move these projects through the pipeline as quickly as possible. These, we're working with a lot of avant-garde vendors that aren't household names, some that are, but are new to healthcare. I think we're one of the first companies to actually engage with Salesforce.com in the cloud and have patient data there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Patients and the data generated from patients is going to become extremely important. As the CEO of Geisinger said, 90% of the patient's data is outside the health system, right? So if we are trying to bring in patient data into the health system and also trying to figure out how do we take that data to be secure enough to say we will be able to consume the data either into the EHR, EMR, or outside of it. Have you guys looked at that? Have you guys thought about those things? Bryan, you want to go?
Isn't it? It's Chris's turn, isn't it?
That's all right. Okay. I'm just changing it. So
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, yeah, I think as we go mobile, like with what Apple's doing, and those are all things that I think health systems have to be looking at as how the next generation wants to manage their medical information. And more and more of that information, biometric data, clinical information is going to be kept in those types of applications. It goes back to the earlier comment of it's this proliferation of data to be able to share and be able to get a more seamless care experience across providers. And so I think that's a one-way train. I mean, we really have to figure out how do we enable that to all the points that Bryan said, but then how do we lock it down? How do we secure it? I think a lot of new technologies out there are trying to take aim at that. And so it's absolutely on our radar, because that's just, I think, where healthcare technology is headed. And it has to be. We're going to bend the cost curve and improve the patient experience.
yeah, and whenever I get asked my opinion on this, I always say I think the technology is there. I'm not worried about can we transmit information safely between one entity or another, or can we make sure that it's locked down at rest in one location or another. The technology is there, and there are some great new technologies that are here today as well. So it's less about can we do it, it's how do we do it, and making sure that you're making business decisions around the usage of the data. Like I always say, I don't say no that we can do something. I'm just going to advise you about what I think the risk of doing that is, given the people, process, and technology that we have at our disposal.
And you bring up a good point, people, process, technology. So about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I wrote a paper on PGHD, patient-generated health data, talked about provenance of the actual data, meaning are we sure it came from the person it's supposed to come from? That's one thing. Second thing is, was it tampered with on its way we got it, right? And third thing is, can somebody else tamper with that so they can flood my data center with a bunch of data that I don't really need? Or is that can it be used as a way to attack, right? And last but not the least, how do we take so much data that's coming from these devices in a capsule form and deliver that to the physician for him to actually take a look at it and make a diagnosis? And Dr. Eric Topol from San Diego actually did pretty good work there, where they were able to dial down one of the patient's blood pressure medication because he was able to get data back from the actual device back into his organization, did some evaluation of the EMR data coupled with previous blood pressure information, and then was able to tone down the medication. Stuff like that is happening. Stuff like that is fairly getting to become normal now. But are we ready to say, yes, it's secure, yes, it's reliable, yes, we can make a diagnosis of that information, and that will stand not just within ourselves, but in court of law. Because at the end of the day, you're protecting the physicians if there is a question, helping them through the process. Have you guys seen anything like that? Chris, Bryan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it with a lot of the new medical technology that's coming out. That's a struggle, I believe, that most health systems deal with, is how do you manage this new technology that's producing a lot of rich data, that's adding value to the patient's medical record for diagnoses and better outcomes. But a lot of these devices are just not designed with security in mind, out of the gate. And I think a lot of the manufacturers are definitely improving, and especially as the FDA is taking a more active role. But how do we protect those devices? How do we manage the life cycle of those types of devices to make sure that it gets the data, it does its job that it needs to do, but it does it safely, and it's not used as a method to harm a patient? I mean, it's not just about the confidentiality of the data, it's the integrity of the data. If something gets erroneously changed and too much of something is delivered to a patient or the wrong thing, that's devastating. It goes back to the patient harm comment. So yeah, the breach is important and we don't want patient data to be breached, but worst case scenario is someone gets harmed or dies, frankly. And so I think it's getting our heads wrapped around how do we manage all of this new technology that's really valuable, but introduces new risk.
Yeah, and I think there's this concept, we hear a lot about the golden record and cleanliness of data. I don't know about you, but we have a lot of, Marie Sanchez's in Arizona. I mean, so it could be, is it this Marie? Is it this Marie? Is it this Marie? Was the date of birth 7/30/45 versus July 7th, 1945? So Chris is absolutely right. There's such a proliferation and kind of unending source set of systems of data that it's how do we get the right data in the right place, get it aggregated, and get it out to the business units that need it. I feel like I'm a marketing executive or something, but it's been really eye-opening for me over the last couple of years to see, meaningful use, and clinicians, they need all this data and they want to use it to make the right clinical decisions. It's amazing to me how much more now that data is being used by other business lines. So the marketing department, not to market to necessarily, but for information about wellness, population health, all of that. And so it's about getting rid of the data you don't need and keeping the data that you need to get to the right people.
One thing to add, totally agree, is there's a couple of things. One is it goes back to just good IT governance, going through the right corporate process, approving the right technologies that make sense overall for the organization. As you have a lot of this new tech, as you go more software as a service, as you basically can rationalize, if I'm a business user, I can avoid IT, I can do this easily, and they bypass the IT governance process. And that's what creates a lot of times this, just heterogeneous environment of different technologies, of data flying around that oftentimes it makes it really hard to organize and provide in a meaningful way. So there's that, and then there's the whole enterprise analytics side of it. It's and this is common in any company. You want to provide the right analytics, the right detail, the right information to folks, but oftentimes people siphon it off from a data warehouse. They do their own analytics. You don't follow the data governance process, which is really, really important. So a lot of what we see in security is just a downstream effect of companies or organizations not necessarily following proper IT and proper data governance. And so we end up scrambling to try to make sense of it, and there's an operational impact and there's a security impact. And so so much of security is just following the right IT technology processes.
It's interesting you say that we go through the same difficulty as well, especially when it comes to research, with UC Irvine, with, Model Discovery, Teach, and Heal. So when you're looking at the first things we discover, you're doing a lot more research, and that impacts us tremendously, because researchers are notorious for the fact that they need this data, this type of data at this point in time, because they've got a grant or they've got a research program that they're trying to put this together. So making sure the right level of research information or right level of data is available for them to perform their analysis and research is a tough ask. And their first thing is security stops me, right? Security stops me from doing my work. How can I avoid going to security? Like, that's the first thing that we've heard. And have you guys heard that? I mean, is this something that you deal with? And
Yeah, I have a call with our CEO of Alzheimer's Research on Thursday because he doesn't like our email encryption solution. So, but I'm looking forward to it. I think, we've all sort of evolved to be more business-minded technologists and security folks. And so I welcome those conversations. I give people my mobile number. I'm like, listen, if you can convince me that you should have an exception or that what we're doing is not the right thing to do for our organization and for our patients, I'll be the first person to figure out a way around it. But if you put the word confidential in the subject line and then send the email outside of the network, you would think you would want that to be encrypted. So I think it's just being reasonable and listening to folks' use cases and scenarios, and not being the no person, but the yes and or the yes but we have to do it this way.
So take it you deployed some sort of technology like a DLP or a way to protect secure email or something like that to protect the data, right? Yeah, makes sense. Yourself, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Bryan said. I think so much of what you're capable, you don't want to be the Department of No. Historically, IT security organizations have been that. And so I think what makes it hard is, as you see so much evolving technology, security has to evolve with it. And practitioners and many want to stick with what they're used to, when it comes to security. Well, I had a level, I just had to put a password in. I don't know what this two-factor stuff is. And so that's the problem, is risk becomes greater in the world of cybersecurity, and more companies digitally transform and more data is going digital. There's more and more risk associated with it. You have to figure out what's the right balance of security. You've got to increase security to a lot of degree, but be creative as to how do you enable the user experience at the same time. An example of that would be, hey, we know we're going to put two-factor authentication on this application, but we have this new thing called adaptive two-factor authentication. So it's going to be able to sense if you're a risk or not and not challenge you with two-factor every time. And if you can look for really, and that's what I would challenge the industry, security industry, product industry, is we need tools like that to be able to secure yet reduce the impact on the clinical experience, and that's the trick.
So, in fact, I was going to rename this title, Saying No is No Longer an Option. In fact, that was one of the titles that we had originally talked about. Because saying no is what traditionally information security used to do, but I think with the industry as a whole has also evolved from just saying no to let's figure out how do we get a solution on the table. Mm-hmm. I think that's where the benefit lies. Solutioning that and talking about IT governance, how about data governance? Where are you guys in the journey?
Well, I'll start. We have a pretty solid data governance organization. And granted, it's in its relative infancy, but assigning data ownership, understanding the purpose of data ownership, really with the key outcome of the business understanding that they do own the data. It's not IT that owns it. It's the same thing that Bryan had mentioned about risk. I mean, I can't say whether to accept a risk. Ultimately, any security risk manifests itself as a business risk. And so it's the hardest part is getting the business to understand and get their head wrapped around that they are the decision makers. We are consultants, we are advisors. We tell them, hey, these are the options that you have. We ran and we think we recommend this. But at the end of the day, it's them going, I get all of that, but as an organization at my level, per our risk governance framework, I'm going to accept that risk. Or I'm going to say, and that doesn't happen as often as you think. Once people understand the risk involved, they get more scared. But there's times where that happens. But it's the same thing with data. They own the data. They have to understand that it's, how it's organized, how it's distributed, setting policy around data to limit data proliferation. All of that is critical and needs to be business-led.
Yeah, we have an information governance committee. It's probably not as mature as Sharps, I would say. It's definitely a newer initiative for us. Same thing though, different councils, different committees own different parts of the data. We're really trying to push out the decision-making to business folks. We want to just create guardrails around how data can be used and information passed. In the meantime, we are putting some technical controls in place to make decisions, on behalf of individuals to somewhat protect us from ourselves. So, we do a fairly low threshold of automatic encrypting as emails leave our environment. We are applying some automatic data classification labels and some other things. So I never want to lead with technology, but we sort of have parallel concurrent tracks here, and until we're more mature on the people behavioral side, we've got to protect ourselves from ourselves with the technology side. And it can come off a little draconian every once in a while, but that's when I just give people my mobile number and say, call me up and tell me if I'm being too harsh. And after about 2 minutes of conversation, they kind of realize the risk there and why we're doing what we're doing.
So it is interesting that, as physicians and clinicians get more and more well-versed with using the EMR, they would like to use themselves data that they can generate from the system. Have you seen that happen? Because, it's now getting to, I could slice and dice my patient population to understand really who are my, HbA1c falters, and how do I get them to send them a notification so they could get the lab results, I can pull that back. In my panel of patients, have you had that anywhere come back to you guys?
Yeah, we definitely have. People like to control their data. It makes it easier, and I think you can have a hybrid solution where you've got to have some certification of data so that whatever data source that they're pulling off of, they understand, okay, this is the true and only data source. It's watermarked. Anything that's not watermarked, we're not going to say as an organization, trust. But then from there, people can take it, massage it, turn it into their own. And I think there's, a lot of interesting technology out there around data virtualization and creating a level of abstraction so you can keep your data a little more centralized and then allow people to come in as a service and use it, interact with it, and siphon it off if they want to use it and do something at a micro level. But it's keeping that core certification and standard set of data as the true source of truth is the key. You get so many organizations, there are multiple sources of truth, and it's hard to run an analytics program and provide meaningful business decisions or informed business decisions if your data is not certified and consistent.
Yeah, there's absolutely no scarcity around desire to have more data, more reporting, more dashboards. In fact, our leader for data management and analytics has a huge team and basically has had to go from clinical practice to clinical practice and just work on their top fives. And so he's playing a little bit of a catch-up mode with them. At least some of the thirst is being quenched at the moment, but I'll admit that our program is not as mature as we want it to be, and it's something that we're really focused on, getting the right data, the right reporting into clinicians' hands, into business people's hands. There's so much of it and so much demand that I really feel bad for him sometimes because he's almost running around with his hair on fire.
Mm-hmm. So, because when we look at data and how we are looking at how do we pull data out of the environment, the one big thing which we have seen is population health. Population health management becomes a big topic of conversation, and then all of a sudden it transcends into, I want to use AI now to identify, I should be able to do this and do that with clinical transformation stuff that we can pull the data out of. And then you transcend slowly into, wait a minute, I'm using AI. How about using genomics and pulling variants of that gene data that we can get from patients now that get there? These are all what I would call kind of the far-reaching topics from a security perspective, but that is going to hit us as well. Your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're only going to get more data. We're only going to use more technology, and that's an area that we have to figure out. How do we lock it? How do we protect it, yet provide the ability to share it and let folks use it, all under the minimum necessary rule of HIPAA, which is often tough to comply with. It's constantly trying to chase that vision, and so, or that objective. So yeah, I think data is just going to become more and more sensitive, and it's going to be data that, like genomics, that you're not going to be able to change. Right. It's not. That's the one thing about being in this industry. You can't just change account numbers or lab results. If you test positive for something, and you start getting into DNA and genomic sequences, I mean, that's for life. And so how do you balance that? How do you use it for good, but not add significant risk?
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some very promising technology that's being deployed nowadays, where besides that sort of technology, we're looking, pretty heavily at robotic process automation to build efficiencies with data and process inside the organization. But I don't think it's a technology issue. I think the technology is there. I just think it comes back to information governance, good IT governance, setting those guardrails for how you're going to allow patients, business users, clinical users to access the information, and building the infrastructure around it.
I'll add, I mean, if an organization doesn't go down that path because of risk, they're going to be left behind. The industry is going to head that way no matter what. So totally agree. It comes down to, there we go. It comes down to governance. I agree the technologies are there to secure it. It's just governance.
So the other aspect that we see on an ongoing basis is there's so much data coming out of these environments. Now I got to store it, I got to retain it, I got to manage it, and I'm like, I can't build a data center to support it, so I'm going to throw it in the cloud. Guess what? Now I have a cloud security to deal with, because now I need to figure out how am I going to retrieve it from the cloud, how am I going to manage it in the cloud, and there is this preconceived notion, oh my God, it's in the cloud, I don't know, I don't have it with me, so it's outside my walls. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, cloud is a totally different animal. It's different than managing stuff on-prem, and people think, I'm going to store it in an S3 bucket or build something AWS or Azure, and we're good to go. How security design and implementation of infrastructure as a service is completely different, and riddled with holes if you're not careful. If you don't have the right expertise to assess it and lock it down appropriately. I think cloud is one of those technologies, like the other things we've talked about, where it's just going to keep going. More and more companies are going to keep going to the cloud. As it gets to scale and the costs come down, it's not going to make sense for many companies to host things on-prem. And so there is a movement to the cloud, there's no question. So it's a matter of, so that's why, you look at the types of jobs out there. Cloud security architects are highly in demand as a result of that. And they get paid very well. And so it's training your workforce to start to learn cloud and follow the way that your organization is evolving. As the technology evolves, you have to evolve with it and make sure that you're prepared to manage it from a security perspective.
Bryan?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, Banner built this beautiful state-of-the-art primary data center, and today it's 17% utilized, and it's been going down. So we moved our electronic health record to be remote hosted, which removed some of that compute from the data center, but with flash storage options and compression of data, really reaching, a mature state, I predict we'll be out of the data center business in the not too distant future. And we'll probably be mostly cloud compute, mostly cloud storage. And so I think it's, what does the Borg say, resistance is futile? So that's my nerd moment. Come on. Never mind. All right.
I got it.
After lunch. So I think to resist, that push at this point is really kind of futile. So I think it's how do we enable this evolution and do it the best way that we can.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we're spinning up is cloud governance. So you have data governance, you have IT governance, you have information governance. We are now spinning up cloud governance because organizations will start saying, I'm going to start building this in AWS. And it's not just public cloud, it's private cloud as well. How do you manage private cloud on-prem? And what's your cloud strategy? And if you don't, because cloud is so different and doesn't require often something being plugged in or hooked up to your network, because they can go and get it somewhere else, having governance around that is actually more important because there's fewer limitations to implementing it.
So if you look at cloud, the security around the cloud, then your identity and access management protocols that you have today within the data center will have to change. Because now you have applications running in the cloud that have a different way to manage, that have a need to be managed differently, especially if they are, kind of in the private cloud or even the public cloud in some respects. Have you guys looked at that from a cloud security perspective?
Sure, yeah, I mean, cloud access security brokers have been around for a while. Microsoft is in this game, as are some of the newer kind of Silicon Valley companies, and I think there's real value there from a monitoring and a management perspective, and then a lot of the identity and access management platforms that do federated access and everything are also pretty well established at this point. So for us, it's a matter of combining the right pieces and parts to get the level of security that we need. And in some cases, we're doing a kind of a belt and suspenders mode because there's not a solution that really does everything that you want it to do. But I'll just beat the same drum. I think the technologies are there. It's about how you manage it as an organization. One particular scenario that we're working on right now is, you can have a cloud or a SaaS provider where, you have contractually obligated them to put certain privacy and security safeguards in place, but how do you know? How do you know that they're there? You can verify them on day one of your implementation, but how do you know that some developer on their side or some developer on your side didn't flip a switch and now all of a sudden, you've created an unsecure or not private environment? And so that's the one thing that we're trying to focus on. I think we can throw a lot of technologies and tools at this stuff, but I think most of us believe that us humans are the weak link.
Totally agree, and I would add, on the vein of third-party risk, you look at a software as a service provider, many of those are built in AWS. They're built in some public cloud, and so it's an inherent risk in engaging with a software as a service provider. How do they lock down their infrastructure as a service environment? And yeah, we get a third-party attestation, and oftentimes the third-party attestation they give us is AWS's. And I said, well, we know how far that goes. That goes up to this much. There's a whole bunch of configuration and management involved in that kind of an environment that AWS will say, well, that's on you, or Azure, any of the, because they're just managing a certain part of the stack. And so I think it's really important to make sure that those vendors you're engaging with are doing their due diligence on managing the rest of that stack appropriately, and not just saying, oh, I have a SOC 2 from Amazon, from this provider that's on Amazon that's good enough for me. It's a big loophole.
So, when you look at cloud access security brokers or technology similar to that, you can at least say, okay, you're extending your cloud or you're using the third-party vendor's capability around security. There's multiple ways to do that. I mean, the public cloud, private cloud, a hybrid, all of those options are there. From a security perspective, cloud governance is probably a good way to look at it. I mean, have a thread from a security perspective for making sure whenever data goes into the cloud or you engage with the SaaS provider. In UCI, we have structures that we put in place so that when the procurement signs a contract, they notify us and go through our process so that we know, okay, this is a SaaS model vendor. We know for sure. We do our review of the vendor and put that from there. That helps us kind of manage risk, right? Not 100% mitigate it, but kind of manage risk. So do you guys do something like that?
Well, we do. I mean, it's like a funnel. You want to drive people to the funnel, drive them to your governance process and don't allow them. And so as you see more and more cloud, you get into the space of using your web proxy and other types of tools like CASBs to be able to see, okay, what sort of sanctioned apps do we approve? And what are the unapproved or unsanctioned apps that people are reaching out to and interacting with? And so you kind of can use that as a forcing function to say, hey, we don't want you going to Dropbox, for example, or whatever the cloud storage provider. We want you to use an approved one that we have approved. That's a typical example. And so I think it's absolutely the case. And it's using, I think, the technology that's out there to nudge people into the proper governance process so that they can be assessed, they can make sure it makes, the enterprise architecture makes sense, it makes sense for Sharp's environment or your organization's environment, and then, of course, that it meets the security requirements before it gets implemented.
Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, you can really be a victim of your own success in this regard. When I started at Banner, it was very ad hoc. What would make it through a security risk review and an enterprise architecture risk review. We've done a lot of process improvement there. We've engaged some vendors. We've done a few other things to be able to scale. And now, we're having trouble keeping up because people are coming to the funnel. And that's a good thing. But it's also... it's a constant challenge, especially if you work in any kind of organization that's decentralized, maybe operates in different states or something like that. Rarely are large companies able to drive your entire procurement process through one legal person or one supply chain person. There's just not capacity to handle that. And so how do you, I don't worry about the ones that happen at corporate because I know that I'm going to have good purview over those. I worry about the ones that are happening out at this little facility that this physician went to a conference and now wanted to buy this thing and talk their CFO into buying it, and then they plug it in, and we find out about it like 6 months later or something. Those are the ones I worry about. So if anyone's figured that out, please send me an email.
So the other thing that you just touched upon is our ability to bring everything together. We got the funnel, now everybody wants to get there. I don't have the people to support it, right? I have a resource constraint that we struggle with. So one of the aspects of looking at from a resource constraint is, should we do a managed security services or, to manage data that we get every day? Is that something we would do? Is that something we would look at from an ongoing perspective? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we are. I mean, we're doing all of the above. I mean, we have to just try and keep up. We're using a managed service to help us act as intermediary to do vendor risk questionnaires. We're doing kind of ad hoc SIG and SIG Lite assessments, and then we're porting that into our EGRC platform to be able to keep track of it all. So it's a combination of technologies, FTEs, and managed services the victim of your own success is that we're not only even doing just, you know, IT vendors. I mean, we're doing vendors for the whole company, you know, bringing it through this process. And so, you know, when you've got a legal management system that's got over 30,000 contracts in it, you know, it can be kind of daunting. So I'm like, hey, the more help, the merrier.
Totally, I agree. I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that that governance process can handle the load. One of the things, you know, managed services, absolutely where it makes sense. We're going through a process now where as we bring in new technology, it's our technical review process. It's pretty manual. They take it to a committee. We're trying to make it more self-serve and an automated platform. So it's faster, so it doesn't rely upon our team as much, and they can do more self-serve. So wherever we can make things self-serve across our entire program, we try to do that and use, obviously, technology to do that. The other thing I'll mention is throttling, I shouldn't say throttling, it's really profiling the types of things that come through that funnel. Do not, you mentioned SIG full, SIG light, applying the right lens based upon your risk program at your company. What's your risk appetite? What do you determine to be a critical, a high, a medium? And then using that criteria that your organization has set based upon number of factors, you then go, okay, analyze each request as it comes in, profile it and go, you know what, this is a critical request inherently, just from a risk perspective. Let's apply this level of scrutiny and this level of scrutiny and this and make it faster for this. Doing the one size fits all is just not gonna work. Right. And so tailoring it is extremely important.